Hi everybody, my name is Sarah and welcome back to Educating Adventures. I bet a lot of you guys could already tell me what a woolly mammoth, a dodo bird, and a Javan tiger all have in common. All three of these species are extinct, meaning there are none of them left in the whole world. And unfortunately, a lot of the plants and animals that exist today are at risk of the same fate of going extinct. So that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today. We are going to be learning about endangered species. Let's get started. All right, you guys, before we jump in, I want to give you a minute to either think about or discuss as a group what it means for a species to be endangered. This is a good time to pause the video to discuss or to think, what do you think it means for an organism to be endangered? All right, are you ready? So generally speaking, when we say that an organism is endangered, we mean that they are at risk for going extinct in the near future. They're facing threats in the wild that are causing their populations to get smaller and smaller over time. Now, endangered species are animals, but they are also plants and fungi. It's not just animals that can be an endangered species. Of course, some organisms are going to be more endangered than other organisms. And lucky for us, there's a group called the International Union for Conservation of Nature, which I know is a really big long word. So we are just going to call them the IUCN for short. And the IUCN has taken data from all sorts of different scientists and used that data to classify animals into different groups of endangerment. So we're going to be talking today about the 9 different categories that the IUCN uses to identify how endangered a species is. The first 2 categories that we are going to talk about don't give us a lot of information. The first category that I want to discuss is the not evaluated category. And basically this means that we have not looked into whether or not that species is endangered or not. The other one is data deficient, which means that we might have a little bit of data about how that organism is doing, but we don't have enough to categorize them into one of the other categories. The remaining 7 categories tell us a lot of information about how that species is doing in terms of how close is it to going extinct. So if we start at the least concern category, that name tells us a lot about what the organisms are experiencing. We're not really concerned that that species is going to go extinct in the near future. Their populations are stable, they have a large range. A coyote is a great example of an organism that is least concern. There are hundreds of thousands of coyotes in the United States alone, so their populations are doing just fine. If we go over one to the near threatened category, these organisms are facing some threats in the wild. Their populations are a little bit threatened, but we're not overly concerned that they're going to go extinct in the near future. This is an organism like a jaguar. There are, we think, more than 150,000 jaguars remaining, and they are facing threats like deforestation and loss to their prey base. So they are facing some threats. Their populations are a little bit unstable, but we're not worried that they're going to go extinct tomorrow. Next, we move to our vulnerable category. Organisms that are considered vulnerable are facing risks in the wild, their populations are getting smaller, and if we don't act soon to help them, they're at risk of becoming truly endangered. This is going to be an animal like a brown bear. A brown bear has quite a large range over several countries. We think there's more than 100,000 of them left. However, we know that their populations are getting smaller, and in time, we might need to put some actions in place to help protect them. Now, if we move one over from vulnerable, we're going to be in the endangered category. Now, endangered is kind of the word we use to describe any animals that are threatened with extinction, but it is an individual category. And endangered animals, in terms of what the IUCN categorizes them as, are animals that are facing big risks in the wild. Their populations are getting smaller and smaller, and it's likely that we are going to need to put some conservation actions into place, or we could see their population get really threatened. This is going to be an animal like the Asian elephant. We think there's maybe 50,000 of them left, and they're experiencing habitat loss and poaching. So there's lots of things that are affecting these Asian elephants, and they likely need our help if their populations are going to recover. If a species that's considered endangered continues to face these threats, their populations continue to get smaller, eventually they move to the category of critically endangered. And this means we are really, really worried that this organism might go extinct in the near future. They might be completely wiped out in the wild. This is going to be an organism like the California condor. There's only a couple hundred of them left. Scientists are working really hard with breeding programs and reintroduction programs to try to get the California condor population stable again, but we're really worried that this organism might become extinct in the wild. In fact, it was once extinct in the wild. So we're going to pop over to our next category, extinct in the wild. As the name of this category kind of tells us, these animals, or plants or fungi, are completely wiped out in the wild. They only exist in captivity, in zoos or aquariums or breeding centers. And this is going to be an animal like the South China tiger. One of the subspecies of tigers only exists in captivity. They are no longer found in the wild. So we consider them extinct in the wild. Now, of course, this leaves us with our very last category, extinct. And we know that when an organism is extinct, there are none of them left in the whole world. Not in the wild, not in captivity. And this is going to be an animal like the woolly mammoth, who scientists think went extinct about 4,000 years ago. There are none of them remaining in the whole world. So now we've seen how these different organisms can be classified, and you might be wondering, how do scientists figure out how to classify these organisms? How do they decide if they're considered vulnerable or endangered? And the answer is, it takes a lot of time, a lot of studying, a lot of observing the animals, counting them, looking at the health of their habitats. We have to figure out exactly how many are left, what their threats are, and is there anything that we can do to help them? There are lots of things that scientists have to pay attention to when they're trying to figure out if an organism is vulnerable or endangered. And it is important that we figure out how to classify these animals, because the organisms that are most endangered, that are the closest to going extinct, those are the species that need our help, right? That's where we want to put all of our time, our energy, our money, our resources. We want to put all of that towards the species who are closest to going extinct, because those are the species that need our help the most. Now, we know lots of species are considered vulnerable or endangered or critically endangered, and you might also think, why does it matter? Why does it matter if a species goes extinct? Well, there are lots of different reasons, aside from the fact that I love animals and I want to see them in the wild. Someday I want my kids and my grandkids to see them as well. But organisms all play a role in the environment. They all have a job. And if an organism becomes extinct, there's nobody left to do their job, and the whole ecosystem can be affected by the removal of just one species. So it's not just important that we protect the big animals, the ones that everybody knows and cares about. We need to protect the little animals too, because they also have a very important job. And there's lots of different reasons that animals become endangered, and you can learn more about these environmental threats in our environmental threats video. But for now, I want to focus on some of the things that you guys can do every single day to help protect endangered species. And I'm sure some of you guys are familiar with the phrase, reduce, reuse, recycle. And did you know that this is actually supposed to be a process? The first thing that we want to do is reduce. We want to reduce the amount of things that we buy and that we use, because to create anything new takes energy. And then when we're done with that new item, a lot of times it ends up in the landfill. So we want to reduce the amount of things that we buy or use. The next one is reuse. If there are items that we could throw away but they could be used for something else, that's great. That way we're avoiding those items ending up in the landfill or as litter in the environment. And lastly, recycle. If you can't reuse the item, then see if you can recycle it. Recycling is different in every city, and the stuff you might not be able to recycle in your recycling can at home, you might be able to take somewhere in town to recycle. So do a little bit of research and see what you can figure out about recycling in your town. Okay, you guys, I know sometimes talking about endangered species can be really overwhelming because we all want to do our part to help. So now it's on you guys. Go ahead, put your brains to work and think how you can help protect endangered species. Thank you guys so much for joining me today while we learned all about these different categories that the IUCN uses to describe animals and their endangerment. And I hope we see you guys next time at our next educating adventures.